Mr. Indyk, I think all religions, to a certain extent, are intolerant. Would you say there's a difference, though, between in degree of religious tolerance or description of religious intolerance between the Shia people of Iran and the Wahhabism religion of Saudi Arabia, leaving, I guess, for the moment, the government out and sort of the degree of tolerance between the two branches of Islam?
It's a difficult question to answer, and I'm not an expert on it. I would just make two general points, which is I think that the Wahhabi strain of Sunni Islam is an intolerant strain. Shias are a minority within the Muslim religion and have suffered and feel kind of persecution as a result of that status, and so they, it's interesting that when you ask about the people, the Jewish community of Iran is actually, although it suffers from second-class citizenship and is constantly being watched and on occasion unjustified arrest and so on, but as a community, they're able to function there in a way that Jewish communities in the Arab world have not been able to survive. So that is a broad statement gives you a sense.
The reason I bring it up is that when we're looking for solutions, if you talk to Iranian Americans in this country, they're very open to engagement with Iran, and I think they're very open as far as their religious beliefs in being more tolerant, I think, than the Wahhabism. I think also when we look and we say, oh, we must push back against Iran, it's sort of like, who pushed whom first? Who provoked whom first? And how far back do you go? We can go back tit for tat to 800 AD, to 832 AD or something, And so, but I think there is some truth when you look at the problems over there that Iran does see things regionally. They are interested in their region of the world, and they push back against people who push against them. Who pushed first? I don't know. In Syria, there's 25,000 Iranian troops. Well, there's a whole lot of Sunni folks on the other side that are being funded by the Gulf states as well. Same in Yemen. Who's right? Who are the better people? Should we be involved in any of these skirmishes back and forth? Is there an answer? We talk a lot about a summit, to try to figure out the Israel-Palestine issue. Seems to me an even more important summit would be a summit between the Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia and Iran, that every one of these are proxy wars throughout the region. But I do say that we get fixated on Iran and we forget about the danger of Wahhabism throughout the world. And when I see the dangers, I see if you want to get involved in a regional war, you will be opposing Iran somewhere in the Middle East. But even if you're not there, Wahhabism is teaching hatred of America throughout the world and funding it. And most of our terrorism has really come from the radical brand, and most of the monetary support for radical Islam and terrorism throughout the world is coming from Saudi Arabia and their money, not from Iran. Iran kills people, certainly. They're not, any angels over there, but they are killing people in their regional wars for their regional interests. And I think we forget about that because we get so alarmed over Iran that we think Iran is sort of this worldwide menace. They're coming tomorrow to New York. Well, no, 16 people from Saudi Arabia came to New York and wreaked havoc on us. And I think it's important that we not forget that there is a religious intolerance on one side that I think really is alarming and needs to be discussed. And I don't think we necessarily have the answer. Islam will have to figure out their own answers to these problems. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of that as we go forward. Your comments, Mr. Indyk?
Thank you, Senator Paul. I think I would make 2 points. First is, in terms of who started, I'm not sure that that's particularly useful, but I can tell you from my own experience, and I'm sure Michael has had similar experience, that the Iranians are very aggressive in terms of trying to export their revolution and trying to promote
they would argue in Yemen. They would argue in Yemen that Saudi Arabians and the Qataris are quite aggressive in getting involved in a war there as well.
Look, I'm sure they would argue that, but they'd be wrong. But anyway,
you don't think there's been Saudi aggression in Yemen?
No, I think that the Saudis intervened because they faced a threat from the Houthis, with Iranian-supplied weapons.
You don't think there's a
But
possible
I don't-
deleterious effort in bombing a funeral procession? You don't think there are repercussions for 1,000 years
of course.
in the Saudis bombing a funeral procession in Yemen? This is not all Iran, and I'm not a supporter of Iran or their government, but there are problems on both sides of this war. It is messy, and there are sometimes no good people in a war.
Right. Well, I agree with that, and if you saw my testimony, I argue that we need to be actively engaged in trying to find a political solution to that conflict. But we've been actively engaged for a very long time in trying to find a political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and that's one I've been heavily involved in. And I can tell you that the Iranians have been purposely subverting our efforts. What is it their business to be subverting that? What if they're so tolerant, why would they be opposed to that effort to make peace?
I've not said the Iranian government is. I think there's a difference between the Shia form of Islam in Iran and the others. And I think a best way to look at this is asking a Western woman where you'd rather live, under Wahhabism or under the Shia regime. And I think the Shia religion is actually more tolerant in Iran than the Wahhabism is of Saudi Arabia.
Can I chime in one thing?
You can chime in for 1 second. Yes, sir.
I just want to say one thing, just to remind everybody. I'm skeptical of the Sunni-Shia sort of framework for looking at regional issues. Don't forget that Iran does support Sunni jihadist groups. They're not strictly acting as sort of a sectarian Shia power, but often acting in a quite cynical way to support groups like the Taliban, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and so forth.